President Putin has accused NATO of having imperial ambitions as the alliance promises to bolster support for Ukraine. He said Russia would respond in kind to any extra military deployments in Sweden and Finland. At their summit in Madrid, all 30 NATO members promised to bolster the military strength of the alliance by basing more troops, aircraft and ships in Europe and the Baltic states. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner has more.
Ukrainian troops on Salisbury Plain, part of an ever-expanding package of assistance Britain's giving to that country as it tries to fight off the invading Russian army. So, this year's summit of NATO leaders in Madrid comes at a time of high tension. The alliance has revamped its strategy towards strongly deterring Russia from making any more land grabs.
Together, our allies, we're going to make sure that NATO is ready to meet threats from all directions across every domain, land, air, and the sea. In a moment when Putin has shattered peace in Europe and attacked the very, very tenets of rule-based order, the United States and our allies, we're going to step up. We're stepping up. We're proving that NATO is more needed now than it ever has been.
Estonia is one of those NATO countries that thinks it could be the next target for Russian aggression. Britain is now increasing its military commitment there. But meanwhile, the war in Ukraine rages on. I asked the Foreign Secretary if she thought it will still be possible to have a realistic peace deal with President Putin.
It's only possible to achieve a lasting peace, first of all, when Russia are pushed out of Ukraine, secondly, when Russia are held to account for the appalling war crimes that have taken place, and thirdly, when we know that future Russian aggression can be prevented. We must never allow this to happen again, and we must protect the future security of Europe.
This has been very much a NATO summit for hawks. Those pushing for a tougher line against Moscow are largely getting what they wanted to hear. Those with doubts are staying quiet. But the net result is a newly reinvigorated NATO that's putting money and weapons where they're needed on its eastern borders. None of this will exactly please the Kremlin. It's already threatened to retaliate in its own time for Sweden and Finland joining NATO. Moscow has now branded this alliance as aggressive, expansionist and hostile to Russia's interests. Frank Gardner, BBC News, Madrid.
Well, let's head to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and speak to our correspondent Joe Inwood. Joe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine absolutely dominating the NATO summit on Wednesday. How has Ukraine reacted to what emerged from there?
They've been very pleased, I think. They've welcomed not just the extra spending, the promises of spending, but the commitment, the fact that they were mentioned so often, that the whole summit was dominated by this, I think is going to be a source of some relief here. I mean, it's probably what they'd expected as well. But really, as we've been saying many times, what they need is not just warm words, they need military support, they need financial support, and they got promises of that as well. The British promising an extra $1 billion, taking their commitment to 2.3, of course dwarfed by the United States, who in total have promised tens of billions of dollars to this war effort. But match that against the need, the fact that they need $5 billion a month just to keep the government here going, and you can see the scale of the problem. But they probably couldn't have got much more in terms of commitment, in terms of support, financial support, diplomatic support, than they got over these last few days.
And Joe, you mentioned that Vladimir Zelensky estimating that monthly cost of what is going on defending Ukraine, $5 billion. And we hear daily what this invasion is costing Ukraine in lives, many of them civilian lives, but it's quite something to see the financial figure.
Yeah, of course. And remember, it's not just that Ukraine has got to spend a huge amount of money on its military to try and fight off this Russian invasion, but its GDP, its productivity, has fallen off a cliff. They reckon it might have lost half of its annual output. The farms aren't working properly, and any ones that are, they can't export the grain properly because of the Black Sea blockade. People have fled the country. There's a huge amount of extra costs that are being incurred as a consequence of the war. Not much is being produced here, and people still need to be paid. Civil servants, teachers, doctors, and the army. So this country is in a really perilous financial position, and it's costing them billions every month. And so in a way, they're running just to stay still in terms of this aid, because what they need is not to stay still. They need more. They need to really be increasing their capacity. And I think that's why we're hearing such regular and such desperate pleas from the Ukrainians for more support.
Briefly, Joe, what is the latest on the fighting, particularly in the east?
So in the east, it's Lysychansk, is this twin town of Severodonetsk, which we've been speaking about for the last few weeks. Lysychansk is now the focus of Russia's invasion, and they are gradually pushing in, gradually trying to encircle it, to strangulate the forces there. And we understand that they are using their old tactic, the tactic they've used throughout this conflict: heavy bombardment, aerial bombardment, trying to pound the defenders into submission. But of course, this is a city where there are still about 15,000 people taking shelter, so there are real fears for their safety.